Welcome to CSAE's Best Minds and Associations podcast. I'm your host today, Heather Toon. We have a great program for you today, but first, let me introduce our guest, Brian Scott. Brian is the founder and president of ClearTone Consulting. Brian provides fractional CIO services to businesses and associations nationwide. His services are built upon a 35-year technology career with the last 21 years at the CIO level. His specialty is helping business and associations get on top of their technology and security challenges, leverage tech to drive revenue, and implement tech to solve their immediate problems. He has 22 years of experience in the meetings and trade show industry and also serves on the boards of the International Association of Exhibition Executives, the Center for Exhibition Industry Research, and the Weinberg Center for the Arts. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
What an impressive resume.
Well, I don't know about that, but I have a lot of fun doing what I'm doing.
Well, that's the most important thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not having fun, then what's the point? And you're helping people.
I try to help them, and there's a lot of help to be offered when it comes to technology. I mean, it's such a vast, broad, and deep, and often confusing area. I mean, even as a technologist, it's such an ongoing effort to learn, because it just changes so quickly.
Well, you can't see it. I think that's my biggest issue with it, is that like I can see a truck coming at me, but I can't see a cyber attack or something going behind the scenes. Like, did I click on a link on accident? I don't know. So
right.
That's hard for me.
Sure. You can't see the cyber attackers. I mean, you can't see the code and software. You can't see the bits flying around the wires in the data center. I mean, it's all kind of nebulous in that way. But it is a beautiful art in of itself, and when it's done correctly, it can really drive businesses forward, and as we've seen in our economy, obviously. And so that's the fun part of it is making it work.
Yes. Well, today we're gonna touch on what's going on here is our subject for today. But you're going to be joining us back for a couple other more in-depth podcasts later in the year. This isn't going to be, you're not going to jam everything up in this one. We're going to just about 20-30 minutes, and we're going to get some really great, valuable information in this one, but there will be more to come. So don't freak out if you're like, I've got to get all this right now.
That's right. Yeah, it's too much, like we were just saying, right, to cram into one podcast. So why don't we do more and talk about it more?
Yeah, definitely. All right. Where do you want to begin?
Well, with the title, what's going on here? The reason I kind of landed on that when we were first speaking was because if you look at any data, and sometimes you can see them in some newspapers, if you're looking at the technology section of a newspaper or a website, it's just everything seems to be going off the charts in all areas, not just cybercrime, right? It's just the last couple of years have just been crazy, but it's that way in cybercrime as well, in cybersecurity. The amount of attacks is just increasing drastically. I was just looking at a stat that 2021 had a 50% increase in cyber attacks over 2020. That trend is continuing. That slope continues to go up. The amount of money that's being lost, or that the revenue that cyber criminals are making is going up. I read in 2020 it was nearly $2 billion.
Jeez.
That's probably has a lot to do with why it continues to accelerate, right? They say crime doesn't pay, but apparently cybercrime does pay.
Is that ransom? Is that from like ransomware and holding hostage people's logins and stuff?
I'd say a lot of it's ransomware, and then the others is selling information and data that they get, right? So there's a huge black market for the sale of information.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of money to be had. And another thing that the reason it's accelerating is that as we see in legitimate business enterprises, there's a lot of automation, artificial intelligence, or machine learning. We're hearing all of these words and the language evolve, and it's all about efficiency, speed, being smarter and faster. Well, that same technology that's being sold and utilized in very legitimate businesses, right? That's all being used by cyber criminals to do what they do that much better and faster. So as we innovate in that space, we're really innovating for anyone who wants to use it for whatever purpose. And so that's another reason that it's just accelerating. It's so much easier to be a cyber criminal, than it has in the past. And And in fact, as a little side story, I mean, my son is studying cybersecurity right now at the University of Maryland, and he was working on a project, downloaded free software, turned it on, was able to scan the neighborhood Wi-Fi's and run a program that, was basically a forced attack to guess their passwords. And in less than a minute was in two of our neighbors' Wi-Fi's.
Oh my gosh.
Now, he didn't do anything with it. It was just a test, and he turned it down. And it was just, in fact, our neighbors are our best friends. And so, he knew what was going on. But it's so easy to do, right? It's and so that's what makes it scary, right? And that's why we have to get pretty smart about how we protect ourselves about that. So no organization can really be safe. And I think some smaller organizations, they think, why would anyone want to attack us? Like, who's on the other side of the world thinking, I really want to zero in on the association of blah, 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 right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like that. They're not. It's this anonymous world, right? Where it's spraying and praying like a machine gun approach, where they're having a lot of automated bots send phishing emails and other attack vectors out just to see where it hits. And they don't care who you are. You could be a one-person shop. You could be a 100,000 person company. It doesn't matter. You're all, it's all in the same attack space.
But why are they trying to get, like, I know I used to work with a client that we just had a website for information only. Like, we didn't take credit card payment. We didn't take email addresses. Nothing was in there. So why are you attacking me? Like, I would get 300 hits a day, and I'm just like, why?
Right. What do you want with me?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's twofold. So one is, even though you may not think that the information, you being any organization, may not think, why is this information of value to anyone else? But it is valuable to your organization in some way. And so that's where, say, ransomware comes in, right? Because if it encrypts your information and you no longer have even access to your own information, that is very, very harmful to whatever you're trying to accomplish, right? And so therefore you may want to consider paying a ransom to get it back, right? And so it doesn't really matter if there's external value in it. It has value to the organization themselves. That's first and foremost. But another thing is, a lot of people think that just names, and titles, like, especially associations have a great deal of member data. And one of the most common things they have with member data is their title and their organization name. Those two, fields are almost in all association databases. Well, that really lends itself into what's happening in the phishing attack realm. So first off, most cyber attacks, and I mean almost all of them, 91% of all the cyber attacks start with phishing. And so if you work in an organization that might be running some phishing tests against its staff and trying to force you to go through training, and you think that's a pain in the rear, please understand that it's that important, because almost all true attacks start that way. And in fact, they call that, training the individual, the employees, that's the human firewall. We've heard of other firewalls, like software firewalls and hardware firewalls to protect networks. Well, because phishing is the main vector, the human being is the primary firewall to every organization, right? It is the first and biggest defense, right, to it. Now, that can be good when they're highly trained and they really understand it, right? Can be really bad when they're not, right? Because, and that's why cybercrime is, we're not great as a organization. I mean, as a country, as a world, really, at probably training on these things. And so there's a lot of doors and windows open out there that cyber criminals are getting through people. And of those phishing attacks, 65% of them are what's called spear phishing. And spear phishing is when they know something about you, or your organization. And there's some even types of spear phishing, like CEO fraud is one type. So they find out that, John Doe is the CEO of this company, and they get his email address and like, so we're going to pretend we're him, and we're going to start asking people to do things for us. That's CEO fraud, and that's a type of spear phishing. So almost all of it is, that means when we say that spear phishing is the large majority of phishing, that means the attackers know something about the organization or the people that they're dealing with, right? So how did they get to know any of this information? How is that? Well,
website.
what do you have to know? Well, all you have to know is your name and your email address and basically your title with your company, right? Now we know something about you. Of course, yes, a lot of that is commercially available or publicly available on the internet, but that's also member databases. When you think of an association, they basically have a who's list of an entire industry, right? Often the executives within that, of the companies within that industry, that's what they're holding on to. Now that in of itself, yes, if you had enough time to go to everyone's website, you could scrape it, but that takes a lot of time and effort. It's a lot easier for a cyber criminal just to poke into your system. Let me just get that whole list of everyone who's anyone in the, the dental hygiene, industry or whatever it is, right, for that association. Now we know everything we know to do really effective targeted spear phishing throughout that entire industry. So that's why that information needs to be protected and why it has value outside of that company. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's one of the first things we tell our boards when we onboard them is if you ever receive an email asking for money or gift cards or anything, unless we had a verbal conversation, don't just delete it, delete junk.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's, you have to, it's kind of a sad state of affairs that to say something like this, but I come to every email that I view with skepticism, right? Every single one of them. And I look at the sender of every single email that I get, right? And anything that has any hint of not being someone that most people are dealing with the same people every single day, right? Where I'd say, whatever, 90%, 95% of the emails we all get are probably with people that we're getting emails almost on a daily basis or, on a weekly basis. So you can recognize us everything outside of that, your antenna should go up immediately. Like, wait a minute, right? This is not something I'm getting all the time, right? Yeah, and so a ransomware, we were talking about that's one of the favorite attack vectors, for the spear phishing attacks, because it's easy to get someone to click on something. As soon as they click on a site, they can download some malware, and if their systems aren't protected in the right kind of way, all of a sudden everything starts being encrypted. And and the cyber criminals are literally, they hit a button that was an automated system. They went to sleep. They probably went up and went fishing. They came back and they looked and they go, oh, look at all of the stuff that we caught. And that's just, it's working on its own. And then they start the process of trying to get the ransom for it. So it's crazy, but it's not impossible by any means. And it's relatively straightforward, and it is very known and straightforward, but relatively easy to protect yourself pretty well against most all of this. That's the good news, right?
Yeah, it's great.
But you just have to know, where to start, where you're at, and how to go about it, and have the right people involved, and then it's okay. So it doesn't have to be we're all doomed,
Sure.
But unfortunately, far too many organizations don't do what I just said.
Yeah, because we don't know where to start, right? Because the email servers want you to download this one in your database. Is that covered? And it's just everything. Where do you start?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Like, where do I start? In fact, when you look at the big mountain, it's almost too hard to start, because it might seem like we haven't really paid attention to it. There's just too much to do. It's going to cost too much money. Well, maybe not. Let's find out. I think the most important thing for any organization is to whether they're starting out, really just starting about thinking about this seriously, or whether they've been doing it for a few years and investing in it. I think on an annual basis, we're to a point in our business world where companies should be assessed their cybersecurity readiness, their security hardness, their policies, their procedures, the tool sets they have deployed against cyber security on an annual basis. So what do I mean by that? It's an assessment. I'm not, there's a lot of, there's compliance programs, ISO 27001 and all this. I'm not saying you have to go and do all of that. I'm not saying that. Those are very expensive. You engage security specialists to do that, but you get audited for it, and it's tens and tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not saying that, but you can get an assessment, which is a little bit higher level, and not quite as in depth, but still broad enough to look at your organization. That will result in kind of turning on the lights in the rooms, and so that you can see which windows are cracked open, right? Which doors are left ajar, and your perimeter. and which ones have the biggest risks associated with them, right?
Mhm.
So without understanding where you are, how can you adequately make plans for what you need to do next, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where you start, is you just got to turn on all the lights. And I often, I think there might even be an organization that many associations might already be involved with that might can even provide that, maybe, and if not, there's lots of security organizations and consultants that'll do that kind of work for you.
Mhm.
But once you get that, then at least you know where you are and you can prioritize them. Security is not a one and done thing at all. It just can't be. For one thing, it changes all the time. It wasn't that long ago, and we didn't have two-factor authentication. That was, and because it wasn't as big of a, email compromise wasn't as big of an issue as it became, and so, things change on a yearly basis. And the tool sets that are available to protect you change on an annual basis as well. And so it's good to know where you are and create those plans. So every year you're doing something to better where you are and you're keeping up, with that. So that's the first thing I would say. That's the first place. And every organization is going to be in a different, situation with that.
Mhm.
I'd say, most often what I just mentioned is multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication of email accounts. That's pretty much table stakes today. I mean, and luckily the stats are saying that about 90% of organizations have that.
Mm.
I can't believe it's only 90, because I mean, it's such a needed thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been, not trying to be too alarmist here, but I'd say if you don't have two-factor authentication turned on your emails, then I would guarantee you that your email accounts have already been compromised and you just don't know it. Yeah. I mean, because it's just happening so much, and it's so easy to compromise those accounts without that. The good news to that is if you turn that on, you're almost guaranteed that they're not going to be compromised, right? Yeah. And when I say that, guaranteed by the not being compromised by standard, phishing techniques and things like that. Now, someone loses their phone that has, or someone has a sticky note on their with their two-factor code on it, or there's always ways to to get around it. But in general, yeah, you're much more protected that way. So that's good.
That's. I've had to deal with writing an apology letter to Microsoft before for one of our clients that was compromised and blasted out thousands of emails. And it is not like you have to write a letter and say, I will never do this again.
Yeah. That's embarrassing.
Well, it's not embarrassing. It's just like, how am I supposed to ensure that it's not going to happen again? I mean, I'll do my best.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's hard to guarantee that unless the organization is really, doing the best practices to help the employees, right? I mean, each individual employee can't be solely responsible for that. It takes the village. It takes everyone in the IT group. But you mentioned data a minute ago, like you mentioned a database, and I think sometimes some organizations think, well, okay, we have our email, maybe we have a cloud email provider and we have two-factor on that. So, I think we're good. They think we're good because, we have either their data is in a database on premise, maybe they have some servers on prem, or maybe they even have a cloud-based database, somewhere in Azure or AWS. And they think our data is in the SQL Server in Azure. I think we're good. Yeah. Well, that's a misunderstanding. Really getting, putting standing up a server out in the cloud and putting something on it like a database is no different than whether it's in your server room locally, really, for all intents and purposes, from a cyber criminal perspective. There's a bunch of all of the security things that you might have to do physically locally. If you had a data center, you have to do all of those things in the cloud through the cloud provider, but they don't come just out of the box, which is, it's kind of amazing. It costs more money. That's why, right? So if you get a service and you're like, I want that service, all right, well, that's fine. We'll give it to you for this amount. Everyone's like, yay. But then they're, then they come back and like, oh, you want to protect that service too? Okay, well, that's going to cost a little bit more, right? And you got to turn these on. So it's easy enough to do, and there are lots of providers that know how to protect those things for you, and it will cost a little bit more, but it's not out of the box. Just because it's in the cloud doesn't mean that it's secure.
Okay, so we should be asking our database companies about like a two-factor
Authentication.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And then also about protecting the data that's in most likely their cloud.
That's right. Yeah. So all access to the, to those cloud systems, whatever they are, should be two-factor authentication as well, no doubt. But then there are protections that cloud providers can provide, things like firewalls and intrusion detection and intrusion protection systems and things like that they can turn on that make that cloud even more impenetrable, that just aren't out of the box, and they do cost more money. So yeah, you should do that. And every cloud providers, and the biggest ones, like Azure and AWS, they have a security scoring system where you can, a third party can even kind of externally scan them in audits and get your security score for like just how secure is your cloud. And so it just because something's in, you think, hey, it's in Microsoft, it's in Azure, we're good. But no, I mean, if you just turned on a service without turning on all of the security around it, your security score is going to be like around 10 out of 100, right? It's not, that's where it starts, like right at the bottom, and you have to do all of that stuff and have a professional, set it up for you correctly to get your security score high. And of course, a high security score means it's more protected.
For me, I use like a 1Password system, and so that stores all my passwords, but then there's two-factor authentication, and then there's this, and it just feels like it takes like 10 minutes to get into anything these days. And like, when is that technology for us? I mean, are we going to get retina scan or like blood samples? How can I make this to where it's going to be easy to get in and also not take an hour of my time each day?
Yeah, that really has become a big problem. But you're already going down a really good path. I mean, if you're using a password management system, I don't see how anyone can survive without it today. And I guess here's going to be another one of those bold systems. If you're not using a password management system, I'm going to guess that almost all your passwords are the same, and they're probably relatively easy, to break.
Yeah,
right?
Why would you say that?
Right, because, and I can say that because I was that person at one time, right?
Yeah.
Long ago, we all were, we're like, oh, what's a password? And you'll just use it everywhere, right?
Yes. I still honestly use one from college 20 years ago.
That's right.
It was a good one.
Don't tell anyone, right?
Oh, they're all changed now. So.
Right. Yeah. And so the only way we were like, well, oh my goodness, well, how would I do anything different? How could you possibly have a different password? And then on top of that, like one that doesn't make any sense, like just a bunch of random letters and numbers, like you can never remember that. Well, that's what a password management system does for you. And I love password management systems, and I highly recommend all people individually use them, right, for their own personal information. But any organization of any size at all, I really suggest that they provide for their staff a corporate one, right? For any kind of business passwords, because they integrate into your browser, they can integrate into your phone. Yeah. And I can tell you, I don't know the passwords to any of the sites that I have. I don't know them. I don't know what they are, right? Because they're all this gobbledygook, right? They're 20 characters long of all of this gobbledygook. But I just use this. I do know one password, and that's a very, very long passphrase into my password manager. That's it, right? And that's the only one you really have to remember, because as long as you have that on your devices, then you're good to go.
Yeah.
If you make them, if they're random enough, right? I mean, even I'm not crazy about 8-character passwords. I'm not, but even 10 or 12 characters, if they're kind of random things, if they're not a word, I'm not talking about a 12-character word, but if it's a mixture of symbols and numbers and capitals and all that, and it's 12 characters, that's pretty tough. It's really tough to crack already, So, but again, if you're using a password manager, who cares? Make it 20 characters, right? Make it 24.
You would suggest not using words.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
When any of the, in fact, every single one of the password managers that you can, yeah, and there's a lot of free ones too. But I'd say do your research, and on the web and find all the good ones. But they can generate passwords for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. Yeah. So you don't have to think them up, and that's why they're all gobbledygook, is because they'll just generate for you and stick it in there. And then, so you go to a new site. Here's the use case. You go to a new site. I'm going to sign up. You
Mm-hmm.
put in your email address. And in the password box, right, you can right click in that box and it'll say, and if you have a password manager, it's integrated. It'll say, would you like my password manager to generate for you? You say yes, sticks it right in there.
Mm-hmm.
You hit create account, and then a little box pops up and says, would you like to save this in your password manager?
Mm-hmm.
And you say yes.
Or update.
And you're done. Right.
Yep.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh, I'd die without it.
Yeah. And password, do you remember when password changing used to be such a big thing? You got to change your password. Every 60 days we got to change password. Well, that's old style thinking, and that's not current best practice in password management. Because if you have MFA, multi-factor authentication, two-factor authentication, where it ought to be, and you have a reasonably or adequately complex password, then you really don't need to change. You just don't. In fact, there's a risk of creating an issue or a problem or a mistake or something like that, just doing that. In fact, I mean, Microsoft and all of the security people say it's fine. That we were doing that when there was no MFA, and people were using 6-character passwords, and they were words like, I love you, or, password 123, and like, well, you better change that every once in a while. That came from those days. And so it does get a little bit easier in some ways. At least you don't have to change your password.
Oh, nice. Perfect. Great. I'm combining everything together, old styles and new styles. So that relieves a little bit of work. So excellent news. Mm-hmm. And so what happens if somebody, if they infiltrate your computer? I mean, that just this thing I can't see keeps me up at night.
Yeah. Well, for one thing, you may not know it, right? And so it's going to be, if you get malware on your computer, which is going to be malicious in some way, you probably will know it, because it's going to start messing with your system. It's going to get slow. A lot of people think my system's just got so slow all of a sudden. Well, that's a good chance you've got some malware on it, right? Or something might, a browser might flicker every once in a while, or your screen might flicker, or anything that's weird like that. It's like you're in the Matrix and something's weird going on, right? Then that means you might have something going on there. But the way you typically do know is organizations can, you can hire managed security service providers that will monitor your equipment for you, right? They'll install these devices or software on it that is purpose built to look for odd activity, right? And look for those things and report back to a central location that would alert someone. And so that's really the way that we determine most of the time that something has occurred, is through an automated way, because they're so sneaky. Cybersecurities are sneaky, right? Or criminals are sneaky, and they can stay hidden to the human eye, right? Pretty darn well forever. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have a low level kind of system that's looking for them.
Something that I've noticed, and I was stressing because I went to Google and it's like, your browser is using a lot of energy. I was like, oh no, I haven't clicked on anything that I don't know about. And then I Googled it, of course. And it was because I was using a VPN. They said that this can happen sometimes with a VPN. I was like, okay, I use a VPN every day.
Yeah, which is good, right? VPNs are a lot of with this explosion of remote work. Mm-hmm. A lot of people are using VPNs now, and some of them maybe never heard of it before or knew what it was, which is a virtual private network. And it's great. It encrypts your traffic between your machine, and the network that you're hooking into. And that's really nice for that traffic to be encrypted so that, criminals can't, see what's going on there, right? But it's funny. It's what I find so many organizations that they've put 2-factor authentication on their email. And think about your let's use the analogy of a house. your email is, the second floor, and it, so it had some open windows and that you close the windows with multi-factor authentication. So you secured that. Well, that's great. But the VPN is the first floor of the house, and they didn't put multi-factor authentication on access into the VPN, right? And so that's like the doors are wide open into your network, although your email is secured, right? And so, so that's a good example where just because of one of the complexities, right? Just because you protected your email doesn't mean you protected all of the areas of your networks, right? And that's what we're going, looping this back to the beginning, is like executives and business leaders, they have to start with turning on the lights and getting an understanding of what they don't know in terms that they can understand. You don't want to see complex reports with detailed, with IP addresses and, all of these risks and things from that perspective. You want it to be written in, understandable business language.
Yeah.
Here are your issues. These are the kind of risks that pose. This is the recommendation of where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And those assessments are critical every year.
Thank you so much. I could spend literally the entire day, but then I would not be able to sleep. I'd have to take some kind of like anxiety pill. We are going to talk to you again next month, and that's going to be more cybersecurity information. And if you want to reach out to Brian, you can reach him, or you can go to his website at ClearTone Consulting, and I'll put a link in the show notes. Brian, I don't know if there's any other contact information you want to give them.
That website is great, ClearToneConsulting.com, or you're welcome to email me at brianscott@ClearToneConsulting.com.
Awesome. Until next time, we look forward to it.
Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.